the part 3 today, talking about the sacking of Jerusalem. And this is towards the end of this typological sequence involving over 30 parallels between Josephus's Wars of the Jews and the Gospel of Luke. We're going to have, so we've done already the Galilean scene there of fishing for men on the Sea of Galilee. Remember, that is at the beginning of both of these ministries or evangelions. Then we did the demons of Gadara. It's well worth checking those two out if you haven't seen them already. And then this one here, which is going to be the final set of about 12, I think, parallels, which is not just one parallel. I must make that clear. But this is extremely interesting because it shows us how closely the Wars of the Jews parallels the Gospel of Luke here. And it's well worth remembering that this is the same location. We're talking about an event that is unique in history. And Titus is basically comes as the Son of Man to destroy the temple, leave not one stone upon another, as is said in the Gospels, in Luke. And Josephus says that Titus completely destroyed the temple. And we know this is archaeologically true. There are we know that it's true. The second temple was definitely destroyed. So let's go through this and we'll see what we can find. So this document explores 12 sequential parallels between the Gospel of Luke and the account of Titus in Josephus's Wars, highlighting a typological system that equates the campaign of Jesus with that of Titus. I'm kind of repeating myself, I'm sorry. As both move toward Jerusalem, this system appears to use literary mimesis to parallel key events, places and symbols. Each numbered section outlines a specific parallel showing the connections in theme, sequence or language as well between Luke and Josephus. So this is number 1. On to Jerusalem. Messengers are sent ahead. Luke, Jesus at the end of his Galilean ministry steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem and sent messengers ahead of him. Luke 9:51-52. Josephus, Titus, after his Galilean campaign, also marches on Jerusalem, sending a division of his army ahead. Wars 397. Typological function here. Jesus and Titus both take decisive turns towards Jerusalem, with messengers preceding them, recalling Moses' journey to the promised land. Okay, so the Good Samaritan, number 2. Some of these parallels you might find are a little bit weak. They can be quite just weaker than others, but they all run in sequence anyway, so you can actually remove some of these parallels, and the typological sequence is still very much there. The Good Samaritan, this is one of the weaker parallels, I think. And the 12th Legion here. Luke, a man is robbed and left half dead. We all know this story. By thieves Yestes on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Luke 10. 25-37. Josephus' 12th Legion is ambushed and stripped by Jewish Yestai, same name, in the same area. Wars 4-5. Typological function. Jesus' parable reflects the plight of the Roman legion, symbolically rescued by Titus moving in from Samaria. Now, I feel like it's obviously someone is left for dead, beaten the hell out of. You're talking a division over one man, but then they're restored by another legion, Titus's legion, I think, there. So it's a little less clear here. It doesn't matter, but I just thought I'd say that. So there are strong parallels, moderate or fairly modest parallels, and then weak parallels, but they all tend to really show us that there's something going on. And of course, we're talking here about parallels within parallels as well. So number 3, a house divided. Satan's kingdom falls. Luke's Jesus warns that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Luke 11, 17, 18. Josephus' faction in Jerusalem stopped fighting among themselves upon the Roman approach. Wars 525. The typological function here. Internal Jewish divisions and demonic imagery highlight collapse before external judgment. So Titus is coming to judge the Jews here, exactly as we find all this language in Luke. Crowds increase, number 4. Luke, as the crowds increase. As the crowds increased, Luke 11:29, and Josephus here, the Jews became still more in number. Wars 5:21, typological function. Crowds swell around the two sons of God as events escalate towards conflict. Lying in wait to catch him. Number 5. Luke, scribes and Pharisees lie in wait to accuse Jesus. Luke 11:53-54. Josephus, Jewish rebels lay ambushes for Titus. Wars 5:23, typological function. The concept of ambush escalates towards the conflict. An accusation is mirrored in both narratives, and these are tightly clustered. I might add, very tightly clustered. Divisions of factions here, 3 to 2. 3 to 2, right? Luke, Jesus predicts division, 5 in a house, 3 against 2. Luke 12:51-53. Josephus, 3 factions of rebels become 2 after internal conflict. Wars 5:31. Typological function. Division into smaller units presage collapse both socially and militarily. 7. Cut down the fruit tree, and this is probably a multi-layered story here. There's obviously a more moral and mythic, if you like, but also metaphorical story in this, which you can see why this was so important to the people who wrote this, because there are multiple meanings that you can pull from this stuff, no doubt, and some of these things dovetail with some of the mythic literature as well. So it's all like, this is powerful literature. So cut down the fruit trees. Luke, a barren fig tree is warned and then condemned to be cut down by Jesus, right? Luke 13:6-9. So he's cursing the fig tree. Josephus, which is a strange thing, right? Josephus, so it's obviously metaphorical. Roman soldiers cut down all the fruit trees outside Jerusalem. Not metaphorical, actually happens. Wars 5:31, typological function. The symbolic unfruitful tree is literally enacted in Rome's siege strategy. And the idea of the bad fruits being removed and replaced with something else, that something else is grafted on. Well, that would be the Roman Caesars, who are the next messiahs, and attested by historians of the time. Counting the cost before building a tower. Luke, a builder must count the cost before starting construction, lest he fail to finish. 14:28-30. Josephus, Titus surveys the wall of Jerusalem to plan the building of a siege tower. 5:61. Wars. Typological function. Strategic planning precedes assault. Satire is implied through the metaphor of a failed builder. Alright, so they're flipping this. Sending a delegation to make peace. Number 9. Luke, a king considers his odds and sends a delegation to ask for peace. Okay, Luke 14:31-32. What's going on here? Why is Jesus talking about this? Josephus himself acts as emissary to negotiate with the rebels. Wars 5:62. Josephus himself, now the guy who's writing this book, typological function. Both stories include attempts at diplomacy amid an escalating war. The same war that Jesus is talking about in prophecy. Interesting. triumphal entry and the stones crying out. Luke, Jesus enters Jerusalem. This is a doozy. If his disciples were silent, the stones would cry out. Luke 19:38-40. Josephus, Roman stones hurled by catapults are heralded by cries of the sun cometh. Wars 563. Typological function. Wordplay on Hebrew ben for sun and eben stone connects prophetic fulfillment and literal siege. And I want to just where is it here? I've got this interesting part, and I think I might just expand on that a little bit because it is quite interesting. There's a pun here. There's a double meaning in this. So Luke here, triumphal entry, of course. I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would cry out. This occurs as Jesus descends the Mount of Olives, entering Jerusalem to acclaim as a king. The Pharisees object to the crowd's praise, and Jesus responds with the cryptic saying, the line is metaphorical in the Gospels, implying that nature itself would testify to Jesus' messiahship, even if humans do not. In Josephus' Wars, again 563, and the stone came from it and cried out loud in their own country's language, the sun cometh. Now listen to this. The Josephus account of the Roman siege, Titus employs massive catapults to hurl white stones weighing a talent at the city. The watchmen on the Jewish towers warn of incoming stones by yelling, the sun cometh, the sun cometh, to alert defenders. Some manuscripts say the stone cometh, but the Western translation preserves the pun. So the Greek allows for both readings, and some of these ancient texts had the sun cometh. It was a play on words. Maybe someone made a mistake, or maybe they didn't. The pun was likely intentional, either by Josephus or later redactors, to draw a double meaning. The physical stone hurled by Romans, or Rome, and the sun, who would bring, apologies, my gimbal just broke, I'm going to keep going anyway, the sun who, the stones suggesting Titus was the destroyer of Jerusalem. He's being cast as a typological son of God, right? Because he's the son of a god, according to the Romans, according to him. So Jesus says the stone will cry out to testify to his identity. The Jewish watchmen cry, the sun cometh. And these stones whistle through the air, right? They, you know what I'm saying? So it's all very interesting. I'm going to take that off there for a moment. Sorry about this. So we'll go back. So Jerusalem is now encircled by a wall. In both accounts, Luke, Jesus predicts that Jerusalem will be surrounded and leveled. Luke 19:43-44. Josephus, Titus builds a siege wall around Jerusalem. 5:12:1. So both of these are surrounded and leveled, encircling, the idea of encircling. Typological function. Jesus prophesies exactly what happens here. He is realized in Titus's tactics. The abomination of desolation. Now the end part here, Luke omits Daniel's phrase, but Matthew hints it is to be understood. He says it is to be understood. Matthew 24:15. Josephus describes the desecration of the temple and the war's horrors. 6'2" FF. Typological function. The gospel sequence disperses key references across texts to obscure the overt Jesus Titus typology. And the abomination of desolation, might well be kind of put together here, and you can see another abomination here in, I think it is Hadrian's statue that's put in the temple, or Hadrian, that's right, in a few decades later, in about the 130s, after the final scourging of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So they likely might be combining two events here, but this abomination of desecration here certainly looks like it might well be, or might have started, with Titus's total destruction of the temple. So let's conclude here. I'm just about to finish. The 12 parallels here support the hypothesis that the Gospel of Luke contains a veiled literary correspondence with the events of Titus' siege of Jerusalem, as recorded by Josephus. The sequence consistently is consistent in imagery, language parallels, yesterday, and so on. The stones cry out, suggesting intentional design rather than coincidence. Such a system reinforces the literary and possibly satirical encoding of Roman triumph within the gospel narrative, aligning Jesus with Titus in a complex typological sequence. Now, to the Bayesian probability assessment, to further assess whether this sequence of 12 thematic and sequential parallels could have occurred by accident. We've conducted this. We do this thing on this channel, Bayesian style statistical analysis, assuming a very low probability that any individual event in Luke could coincidentally match a thematical and sequential aligned episode in Josephus, so conservatively estimating at 5%, which is a low estimate when you consider things actually being completely coincidental. The probability of all 12 events aligning by pure chance is very low indeed. It equates to a very huge number, 1 in 4 quadrillion in chance, and that might sound ridiculous, but we're looking at probabilities that are stacking here and specific references and exactly the same place, and the notion that that Titus is the Messiah, just as Jesus is named the Messiah. So I would suggest 99%. We can put this down to a smaller number. I just wanted to, just hash this out quickly though. So we have. In all this, let me go back up here, onto Jerusalem, messengers are sent ahead. You wouldn't really do that if you were just a guy with a few apostles. Why would you need to send a delegation ahead? The Good Samaritan, of course, and the 12th Legion. That reference, a house divided against itself, will fall. The crowd increases, lying in wait to catch him. Division of factions 3-2, cutting down the fig tree, counting the cost before building a tower, sending a delegation to make peace. Triumphal entry and the stones cry out. That's a very powerful one. Jerusalem is encircled by a wall. The abomination of desolation. Right, this all happens in Josephus. The reason we think that Luke was written post, and obviously this is like Mark has resonances with this narrative as well, but just smaller ones. The reason we think that the Gospels were all post-70 is because of this. But we're drawing a strong comparison here in every particular with the Josephus account. So why is it that Titus seems to be doing exactly what Jesus is doing? And as we saw earlier on with the Galilean beginning, and then the wilderness, escapades in the wilderness, with the one event being the demons of Gadara incident, well, it's all quite obvious. Jesus is Titus, and Titus is Jesus.